Hey folks, it's your favorite Canadian info wrangler here, back at you again for one more week through the power of the interwebs. So here we are, and as you can see, you're looking at me, you're not looking at driving footage. That's it for my tea because I spilled the first cup all over my desk and had to restart this video. Perhaps I'll make another tea after the video's done. But for now, yes, you're not looking at driving footage. Isn't that something? And I'll tell you why. Because I decided that for this week, we're going to get away from the churches. Just going to take a break from it just this week. Next week, I'll get back at them. But for this week, I'm going to do a review of an operating system called Bazzite Linux. So recently I've begun using Bazzite as my primary operating system on my computer. I try not to use Windows anymore unless I absolutely have to, because it's not an operating system anymore. It's a data mining system. For those of you who don't realize what Microsoft is doing, Microsoft is gathering data about how you use your computer and what websites you visit, and then it sells that information to advertisers. I don't want to be a part of that. You probably don't either. You probably don't like the sound of it, but you don't know what your alternatives are. You're probably thinking you're trapped with Windows. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is an alternative, and it's called Linux. And I'm switching to Linux as much as I can. I say as much as I can because right now there are still times when I can't avoid Windows. I have Windows and Linux both installed on my computer, and I boot into Linux most of the time, but every now and then there's an app that I need that I have in Windows and I don't have in Linux. Now, that's probably not because the app doesn't exist in Linux. It's probably more likely because I haven't been able to find its alternative. See, of course, Microsoft and Apple have trademarked all of the names of the applications that are on their computers, and same with third-party developers like Adobe providing Photoshop, or whatever they're calling it these days. Adobe holds the trademark on the name Photoshop, so you're not going to find Photoshop in Linux, but what you will find is an absolutely free alternative called GIMP, which stands for GNU Image Manipulation Program. So, having said that, let's dive into this a little. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here before I explain to you what it all is. So, for the uninitiated still using Windows and blissfully unaware that there are alternatives, let me lift the shades from your eyes here and try to answer the question, what is Linux? Well, for starters, even saying Linux is technically wrong. I'm going to nerd out a little bit here. It's actually GNU Linux, which stands for GNU's Not Unix. And yes, it's pronounced with a hard G. And speaking of pronunciation, the name Linux comes from the man who created the Linux kernel. And you might hear people saying Linux, which is technically wrong. And here's the logic for it. The reason why those people think it's right is because the creator's name is Linus Torvalds. But the reason why it's wrong is because Linus is a Finlander, and he pronounces his name Linus. Therefore, the Linux kernel is properly pronounced Linux. Now, they don't expect us North Americans to pronounce it that way. They're fine with us pronouncing it Linux. But Linux is wrong. Linus is, of course, the North American way of pronouncing that name, but the holder of that name pronounces it Linus, and we should respect his wishes and therefore pronounce his operating system kernel Linux. So that's enough nerding out. Well, not quite yet. GNU Linux refers to the GNU project, which was started by Richard Stallman in the 80s, according to my notes, to create a completely free Unix-like operating system. Now, Unix is not something you would want to try using on your main computer. Unix is all command line. You have to type in commands for everything you want. There's nothing graphic on your display. Well, I mean, if you're launching programs, you'll probably have a graphic interface after you launch it, but for the most part, Unix is command line structure. And we used to use it in high school. I remember us having Unix on some of our computers in high school, and we also had IBM Basic, which was also command line. But, yeah, so like I said, GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. And GNU provides a collection of essential software tools and many core utilities. So when you download and run a quote-unquote Linux distribution, like Ubuntu or Fedora or Debian, you're almost always running a GNU userland on top of the Linux kernel. So the full system is GNU Linux. Windows is the same. When you run Windows, you're running a Windows user interface on top of the Microsoft kernel. Mac OS is the same thing. For the longest time when you were running Mac OS, you were running the Apple operating system on top of the FreeBSD kernel. Now, as I understand it, Mac OS no longer has BSD code in it anymore. They've pretty much replaced the entire kernel with their own code, from what I understand anyway. But, so yeah, when you're running, if you download a version of a distribution, which most of us in the know call it distro, if you download a distro and use it, you're using a GNU Linux user interface on top of the Linux kernel. So that brings us back to the question still, what is Linux or GNU Linux? Well, Linux is the kernel of the operating system, while the GNU project adds some core utilities, and what this leads to eventually is an operating system built around that kernel and utilities. There's a desktop environment added to it, there's some applications added to it, stuff like that. Your operating system is how you interact with your computer. It's what you see on the screen, the start button, the icons for your various applications that you use. That's your operating system. Windows is an operating system. Mac OS and iOS are operating systems. Ubuntu is an example of a Linux-based operating system. Another example would be the Fedora project, while another still is Linux Mint. I have Linux Mint installed on this computer, but I don't use it anymore. I'm going to be uninstalling it probably. But I'm currently using Bazzite Linux, and I have Windows on this computer just in case I need it. But it won't be long before I get away from that, I'm sure. And there are literally over 100 different Linux-based operating systems that you could choose from, many of which are specifically made to do certain things. Many of them are not just general operating systems. They're very specific. And so you probably don't want that. But Bazzite, today I'm going to be showing you Bazzite. That's one such distribution or distro. And Bazzite is special in the Linux community in that it can run games. For decades, it has been very difficult, nigh on impossible, to get games to run in Linux. For one thing, nobody made Linux versions of the games, so you had to use a Windows version of the game and try to adapt it to run in Linux. And you had to be a programmer to know how to do that. Another problem was that there just wasn't any support from the game developers. If you did try to get a game running in Linux, you're on your own. There was no programs or anything supplied by the game developers that might help you do it. Bazzite, however, takes care of that, and out of the box, meaning as soon as you install it, there is no box, you download it to a USB flash drive. But right out of the box, it runs most single-player games on the market, including the vast majority of the Steam library. So, if you're not a gamer, this means very little to you. And like Gary, you might be happy with something like Debian or Ubuntu or Mint. But if you're like me and you like to play some games, I have an extensive list of games in my Steam library. Then Bazzite may be the one for you. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you what the Bazzite Linux desktop looks like, and I'm going to run a game. So let's do that, shall we? Okay, so here we are. This is what my Bazzite Linux desktop looks like. This is the default desktop background installed by Bazzite, which I haven't bothered to change yet because I like it. The colors are nice. It's dark and muted, not bright and jumping in your face. Now down here to the left, watch my cursor. Down here to the left, this is the application launcher, and that is the equivalent to your Windows Start button. It brings up all your applications. They're divided by categories, not by name like in Windows where, if you scroll through all programs, it's going to be alphabetical by name. Whereas here in Linux, it's usually categorized. So here's my games category. We have K-Patience. We have to play solitaire. You're not running Linux if you're not playing solitaire. Am I going to bore you with a full game? Of course not. Let's close that. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of my big games running. We're going to launch Cyberpunk 2077. And you're going to see that it runs quite nicely. It's going to take a little while. It takes some time to process these shaders. And there is the magic of cinema. I could fast forward through this, but I'm not going to because it's going pretty quickly already anyway. We're almost there. 78%, 79%, 80%, 85%. Yeah, we're getting there. It does this every single time it launches. It will. That's just the way it has to do things in order to get the game to work. But as you can see in the background here, you can just barely see it. I've got Steam open because it automatically opens Steam when you launch a game from your Steam library. And Steam is built with a lot of Linux code. And that's one of the reasons why they've been able to make this work, so that games can actually run in Linux. It's not emulating Windows. That's one thing that a lot of people some people who know a little bit about computers might think that it's emulating Windows, because for decades there's been an application called Wine, which stands for Wine is not, what is it? Wine is not an emulator. That's what it stands for. Which is weird because it emulates Windows and lets you run Windows games. So I don't understand why it's called Wine is not an emulator. But it is. And for some reason... Oh, there we go. Well, let's play the damn game already. Alright, there we go. See what I mean? Even the intro graphics look pretty damn good. I have to enter my account name, which I didn't want to do there because it takes a little extra time, and I'm trying to get through this. This is actually a cool game. There's a program that you wind up getting stuck in your head, and the program contains a character called Johnny, and Johnny is voiced by Keanu Reeves, which is kind of cool. So you can see the game is running just fine. And I'm just going to go through this with the defaults because I don't have my account entered. Once I enter my account, it'll bring up my save games. So right now, I'm just going through the defaults just to show you that the game is running, and it's running just like it would run in Windows. There's no perceivable difference in the way it's running. I can't see. I mean, maybe there's a slight frame rate difference, but I don't think there's even that, because I was watching, shout out to Jay's 2 Cents on YouTube, I was watching him, and he installed Bazzite, and I think Cyberpunk was one of the games he ran on it for his demonstration, and they were benchmarking it at the same time. And I don't think it was showing any drop in frame rates or anything like that. So anyway, that's the game actually running. And we're going to quit the game now. Confirm. There we go. So you can see it runs. This is odd behavior. Very odd. I can't get it to let me take Steam off the screen. Exit Steam. There we go. That's better. So, through the magic of cinema, we're going to come back to the desktop in what for you will be just a moment. And through the magic of cinema, here we are. We're back at it. It's Hollywood, man, I'm telling you. I know what I'm doing. And I don't need to get into some of the things Hollywood gets into. Anyway, so as you could see there, I was just running Cyberpunk 2077. And it looks and runs great. I've also got Starfield installed, as you can see in the at that time you could see at the in the top left corner of my desktop, the Starfield icon was there, as well as OpenShot, which is what I use to edit my videos. I had Fallout 4 running, as well as the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, but I removed both of them because I don't really play them anymore. I've played them through so many times, it's just boring now. So, but they both ran great. Fallout 4 and Elder Scrolls Skyrim. They both ran just as great as Cyberpunk 2077 runs, and Starfield runs just as well. And those of you in the know will know, my graphics settings on all those games are ultra. So that's pretty cool too. So yeah, that was the Bazzite desktop. And I showed you a couple of the icons. You know what? Let's go back to that and I'll show you a couple more. Okay, so here we are back on the Bazzite desktop. And like I said, this is like your start button in Windows. This is where all your applications are. And there are so many. See, now here in Bazzite, the software package manager is called Bazaar. And I've pinned Bazaar to my taskbar. But you launch Bazaar, and you can find any application you want in here. And it has them categorized, but you can also search. So let's do a search for Photoshop and see what comes up. See, now you've got Photocrea, I don't know what that is. Jexit Tool, don't know what any of them are. Oddly enough, GIMP does not come up here, but GIMP is the one you would want to look for. So sometimes what you're going to have to do when you've installed Linux, there's GIMP. And as you can see by these pictures on the side, you can see how GIMP looks when you're running it. It looks much like Photoshop or any other. Let's take a look at that here for you. GNU Image Manipulation Program. Close that, maximize that. So you have an interface very similar to Photoshop and whatever other editors are out there. I don't really know because I don't do much image manipulation, so I'm not really familiar with that universe. So we're going to quit that. And then Lutris is a video game platform similar to the Steam platform. I don't use it. I should probably unpin that anyway. Then we have the terminal. The terminal is where you would enter commands if you ever need to. Now, I was just starting to say that sometimes what you're going to have to do if you switch to Linux is you're going to have to go into your browser, whether you use Brave like I do, or you're going to use the default installation of Firefox. And you're going to have to search for alternatives. So, for example, like we saw with GIMP, when I went into the package manager and searched for Photoshop, it didn't show GIMP. But if you were to go into your browser and search for Photoshop alternatives, GIMP would probably be the very first result that pops up. And then you would go back to your package manager and search for GIMP and install it. And it's free. It's free. That was kind of like Biden whispering into the microphone, eh? We don't want to do that too often. But it's free. That's one of the best parts of Linux. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't spend money, because you should donate to most of these projects to help them. It helps with their development costs. But now the terminal, sometimes, I haven't had to yet, but sometimes you will need to drop down to command line and enter things like sudo apt-get install something, whatever the program name is. If you use ChatGPT in your browser, it is a wonderful tool. ChatGPT can give you step-by-step instructions on how to install a program that you need to install by command line or whatever. If anything like that ever comes up, just go to ChatGPT and say, how do I install this in Bazzite Linux? And ChatGPT will give you instructions that you can understand step by step. It'll show you the exact commands that you need to type in. And it'll just go. It'll work. Believe me, I use it all the time. So, anyway, getting back to, let's get out of the terminal. You always have to type exit to leave the terminal. Never close the window. It's not a good thing to do. So then we have Bazaar, and I showed you that already. That brings up your package manager. Dolphin is your file manager. And just like in Windows, it shows your files. Shows all your photos, pictures, videos, downloads, documents. It's all there. And then we have the Brave browser, which is not the default browser with Bazzite. The default browser is Firefox, but I've been using Brave for a few years now, and I prefer it over everything else. So every time I install an operating system, the first thing I do is I bring up whatever the default browser is, and I go search for Brave and download it, and then start using that from then on. So that's Brave. And then I have a torrent client, which can be helpful for downloading some software packages, but it's mostly used for things that I can't tell you about in this video. And then we have OBS Studio, which is what I'm currently using to record this. And then we have the Audacity Sound Editor. Now, Audacity basically just records whatever you input into it. It can be your voice, it can be instruments, it can be whatever. And Audacity will record it, and it can output an MP3 track for you, or other formats as well. So as you can see, the Linux community can provide some pretty compelling alternatives to Windows or even Mac OS, and like I said, it's all free. I didn't pay a dime for any of this. I just went to the various websites involved and downloaded their software. Now, you still have to pay full price for your games. Any games that you have in your Steam library or anything like that, you would still have had to pay full price for those to get them into your library. But you're not paying anything for Bazzite Linux. You're not paying anything for any of the applications that are running here. But as I said, you should donate. It's very helpful to the projects. But to be honest, I've yet to come across a Windows application that didn't have a free Linux alternative. It's all out there. You just sometimes have to do some searching. As I pointed out, for graphic design, you want Photoshop, there's GIMP. Or you do 3D modeling, perhaps. Well, there's Blender, also free. Now, Blender isn't as easy to use and figure out as 3D Max, but Blender also is free and 3D Max is not. Microsoft Office, there's LibreOffice. I'll show you that. Office, LibreOffice. Database, calculations, draw. It's all here. LibreOffice Writer. We don't want the tips on startup. There we are. Looks just like Microsoft Office in most ways. And it works pretty much the same as all of them. So, you know, they're all available in your built-in software repository, available through Bazaar on Bazzite. But every distro, generally speaking, has its own software package manager with its own unique name, but they're all there. They all provide for free all of these nice apps and everything that you need to use. So there you have it, folks. Hopefully I've explained what Linux is and why you may want to make the switch from Windows. Gary and I are both doing it, and we think you should too. Gary is installing Debian Linux. Debian 13, I believe, is the latest version, and that's what he's installing, or he has already installed, and he's playing with it now. Personally, I love Bazzite. It's Bazzite, for any of you who know a little bit about Linux, or perhaps a lot, Bazzite is based on Fedora. Whereas so many distros today are directly or indirectly based on Debian. Ubuntu is based on Debian. Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu. So indirectly it's based on Debian. So I found it, because I've been following Linux for a couple of decades now and waiting for the time when they would release an OS that I really like and that works out of the box, doesn't require me to do a whole bunch of command line editing, because I'm not a programmer. I don't know commands. You know, I have to ask ChatGPT to help me with that. So yeah, I've been watching for a long time, and because I've been watching so long, I mean, I remember the days of Red Hat Linux, and we're talking like, I think the earliest Red Hat version I ever used was 3 or 4. So that's going back a ways. Red Hat eventually, I don't know details, but eventually became Fedora. I don't know if it was just a marketing thing, they just changed their name, or if there was more to it than that. Maybe a merger with another developer, I don't know. But I never would have expected to find that I actually like a Fedora-based operating system. That was kind of a surprise to me, and I really, really like it. I've used SUSE Linux in many iterations. I've used Solaris, which isn't even Linux. I believe Solaris is BSD based, if I remember correctly. And I used Mandrake way back in the day, which later became Mandriva. And back then, my preference was Mandriva, or Mandrake, originally. You know, back then it was mostly, the Linux universe was mostly dominated by Red Hat and Mandrake. You were in one school or the other. And my personal preference back then was Mandrake. I don't know which operating systems nowadays might be based on Mandriva, if any. But I was surprised to find that I really like one that is based on Fedora. So there's that. And I think with that, I'm going to close out this video. And we'll see you next week, where we'll pick up where we left off with Thunder Bay and area churches. So I hope some of you enjoyed this. I hope some of you may have even found it educational. And God's willing, Daffy Duck willing, we'll see you all in the next video. Ciao for now.